Hello everyone, my name is J Schwan. I'm joined here today by two of Kin Carta's CTOs, Henry Oyuela and Mike Koleno. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to talk a little bit today about enterprise architecture and how it contributes to seamless customer experiences. And I think the best way to maybe start off the conversation is to, as a CX architect or an enterprise architect, what are some foundational themes that we should consider when embarking on any one of these projects?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Jay. So I think three places where we focus when we go in. The first is building a scalable solution. Second, is it extendable, right? So thinking about extensibility, and then most importantly, security from the get-go. How do we ensure that whatever we're building is going to be secure? Those are three tenets that we walk into any engagement from an enterprise architecture standpoint with, and immediately are on the forefront of our minds.
So scalability, extensibility, security, foundational elements of any system. When you're specifically talking about a customer experience that you're building, to whether we're at the front end of the journey or we're in a servicing phase of the journey, are there some other things or some other points that you kind of hone in on as architects when considering what technologies to use, how to piece them together, et cetera?
Yeah, I would say like philosophically, empathy. Bringing empathy into everything that you do when building digital products for organization. You're going to want to have empathy for who you're actually building it. So having more of like customer-centric approach, but not just externally, but also internally. There's a culture to every organization as far as like what they've done in the past. So you have to take that into account, in addition to the capabilities that you have currently as well. You want to be resourceful and reuse some of those while you're building out for what you're designing for the future. And I think if you have that, it's going to help drive to better solutions.
Well, and that's often one of the issues, right? Is companies feel constrained by the systems they have in place today, and maybe they have an aspiration of something they want to get to, but how do you kind of balance those two things as you're relating to create value in the immediate term?
That's a good point. I think thinking holistically is often a challenge that you're going to confront. So you can design for the future, but you start building components along the way, right, that allow you to put these transitional architectures that will lead to where you want to go.
So what do you mean by transitional architectures?
Well, when you're building architecture, you're going to want to lean it out. Build small components for building immediately what the customer needs now today, to gradually get to where you want to go in the future. Right. So if you're building something for the front end, use a pattern or design concept called design systems. And design systems allows you to break up designs in smaller assets and chunks that developers can build. By breaking up the problem like that, you can start building components that are reusable and immediately provide value to the customer.
So across the whole journey,
Yes.
They're having the same experience, they're seeing the same things.
Exactly. So you can actually build it for multiple applications that the organization is serving to the customer, right? And that starts at the design level. And you follow similar concepts as you go down the stack from the front end as well as back end.
Yeah, I was going to say we see the same thing in terms of modernizing applications, systems of record today through the use of APIs. So the APIs themselves provide a level of modularity that we haven't traditionally seen before, but again speak to the same benefits and opportunities provided by decomposing anything, whether it be a design system, here in this case, large systems of record. API enabling those systems opens up opportunities as it relates to digital customer experiences, but also provides the opportunities such as reuse and things of that nature inside the organization.
So when we talk about API-enabled systems as an example of a transitional architecture enabler, what are some of the, components of that organizations need to think about in order to start thinking in a more API-enabled way?
Yeah, so when we think about our customers, we walk into some of these organizations, they've been building and deploying software traditionally in the same manner for the last 20 years, right? And that's everything from the people involved to the process, and then more importantly, the architecture, right? So historically, organizations have built systems deployed as a single unit, typically referred to as the big ball of mud, right? And so that has created problems for a lot of organizations in the digital age because anytime that they want to handle a spike in terms of traffic that they see, they have to deploy that big ball of mud n number of times in order to scale that out, right? And if you take a more modern problem scenario, which is how do I account for all the traffic that's going to flow to my cart functionality inside of my e-commerce experience on Black Friday? If you contrast that to the new architectures of today, this microservices, API-enabled, decomposed architecture where our deployable is actually a set of services, that allows me to scale up just my cart functionality and that alone on Black Friday to account for that particular use case, right? So these are the types of architectures that we're putting in place, again, to be able to satisfy a lot of modern day use cases that we traditionally haven't been able to solve for.
So I see what you're saying and how a microservices enabled architecture can account for scalability type industries, but I would imagine it also applies to the journey. If you want to take a piece of that big ball of mud
Absolutely.
and be able to use it in different parts of the journey, microservices enables that, and design systems enable that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's not just that particular one journey, right? You could be inside of a very large organizations. Different teams are satisfying, maybe potentially different personas inside of the organization. Whereas, again, that service could be potentially reused between teams who are, again, focused on different personas, different use cases, etc.
So thinking about transitional architectures, thinking about patterns like design systems, building API-enabled systems, microservices empowered systems, all seem to make sense. I'm sure easier said than done.
Absolutely.
When we talk to getting to the doing, how do organizations need to think about organizing themselves differently to start enabling some of these newer patterns?
Yeah, so today we see a real rebirth in terms of XP methodology. It really is sort of the Agile plus in terms of how organizations are building software today. It has a couple of tenets and components that lend itself very well to CI/CD and other modern processes, most specifically test-driven development, commonly referred to as TDD, which is basically organizations wanting to bring quality control up to the beginning of the development process as quickly as possible. And then this idea of pair programming, right? And this is really playing well as organizations look to transform themselves, taking experienced developers, putting them and sitting them alongside of junior developers and really showing them how modern software is being built today.
So when we talk about things like XP and CI/CD, and you hear about these digital native companies like Netflix and Amazon being built from the ground up with these concepts, how realistic is it that a legacy enterprise could adopt these same methods and achieve some of the same results?
Yeah, we're seeing it here today. One of the active engagements that we have right now is North America's largest food distributor. We're working with this particular client, helping them see and understand what modern software engineering looks like, employing some of these new tactics, and ultimately they've transitioned out of enterprise quarterly releases to being able to deploy production software up to 10 times a day.
So fully implemented XP, CI/CD in what kind of time frame, realistically?
1 year. We went from a large, monolithic, big ball of mud e-commerce experience to completely microservices-driven, true CI/CD, delivering out to production 10 times a day in less than a year.
Yeah, fantastic. So as we think about the future and kind of what's coming next, and that's always typically where conversations go as it relates to technology, is the next shiny object, the next set of core capabilities out there where enterprises should or could adapt. What would be your guidance as it relates to what companies should be thinking about next?
I like thinking of it as more of like a maturity spectrum. And depending on where you are in that maturity, what technologies to adopt. And it's all going to depend on the culture of the organization as well. Mike talked about investments. Are you invested to continuously innovating? And sometimes it takes a while for an organization to get there, to realize that you're no longer just a traditional business. You're a digital business. So this is part of your DNA now. I think the sooner they get to that, the sooner they can start adopting some of these technologies.
We talk all the time about the fact that regardless of where you're at from an organizational maturity standpoint, everyone has the ability to move faster and more efficiently than they do today. So that's a goal that any organization can put on the roadmap for themselves in the coming year, as to how do they move faster than they're currently doing it today.
Yep, absolutely.
So adopting these modern ways of building software, like CI/CD and
Absolutely.
XP,
Absolutely.
adopting this concept of transitional architectures and utilizing design systems and API-enabled and microservice-enabled systems in order to allow the organization to extend in a more scalable way.
Yep.
Those fundamental components can be adopted now.
Absolutely.
And it's really about building agility and confidence
Absolutely.
more than anything else.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining.
Thanks
you,
for
Jay.
having us.
Appreciated the conversation.
Likewise.
Thanks for joining us today.